So recently I did a review video of the Thermaltake SWA Fan EX12, and it's a very cool fan kit. If you haven't seen that video, I'll put a card here for you so you can go check that out. So just to give you a quick recap of that fan kit, it connects together magnetically using a number of pins on each fan. And those magnets are pretty strong, so they just kind of click together. And then it uses one single cable, which also magnetically attaches. So that cable then connects into the Thermaltake controller, which you then use the TT RGB Plus software from Thermaltake to control those fans, both speed and RGB lighting on it. So the other major function to this fan is it's got a swappable blade. Basically, you can take the standard blade that it comes pre-installed with, you can pop that out, you can put the reverse blade in and change the airflow direction without changing the orientation of the fan. Now, the one downside to that fan kit, in my opinion, is the controller does not sync up to your motherboard or Corsair for that matter, which is really where I want to use it. You're kind of forced into using the Thermaltake software. That connection on that fan kit is a 9-pin connection, which only connects to the Thermaltake controller. Now, I also recently did look at the TT Sync, which some of the fans, which are the 9-pin fans, will connect into this controller, which then does sync up to a motherboard or Corsair for that matter, which is where I really use those. However, this goes out of its way to say it does not work with the SWA fan, and it brings up one of the important problems we're going to talk about in this video. This is designed for one fan per controller. This is going to put 3 fans on an individual controller, which I believe the electrical specifications of the controller probably don't support that. But let's talk about that. So while I was researching information for that most recent video that I did, looking at the Thermaltake SWA fan, I noticed on the Amazon page that there was another option there. So in comes the Thermaltake SWA fan EX12 ARGB sync. So it's a really subtle difference here. There's an RGB version and there's an ARGB version. So just to get right to it, the difference between these two fan kits is the RGB model that I purchased previously has the controller in it and it's intended for TT RGB Plus. Now this particular version is the same fan, connects together the same way. So it's still a single cable to control the fan set, but it splits into 2 and it gives you a standard 3-pin ARGB connection and a 4-pin PWM connection. So I was very excited when I saw this. Now I don't recall seeing this fan kit when I did that review previously. I don't know if this has been released since, and maybe I just haven't noticed it. But I wanted to bring this fan kit to your attention because it's kind of a cool thing, because I don't particularly love the TT RGB Plus software, and not being able to sync it up to Corsair is kind of a downer about that fan kit. So the 140mm version of this fan also has the same thing. There's 2 different versions of that, so be aware of that. I did look online briefly just to see if Thermaltake released this new cable just by itself. In case you have the old fan kit and you want to kind of just put the new cable on it, I didn't see anywhere that you could get that. Maybe you could contact Thermaltake and purchase those separately. But this new fan kit gives you the ability to sync it up with your motherboard, an RGB controller, and in my case, I was really excited about syncing it up with a Corsair controller. Notably, the Corsair Core XT was what I initially was going to put it on. But after I thought about putting it on the Commander Core XT, it dawned on me that there might be a problem with that, and I want to talk about that just briefly in this video. Because there's going to be 3 fans now on the PWM connector and the ARGB connector, it brought up what seemed like a very little but yet a very important little fact, and that's the fact that there are 3 fans on each of those connectors. So you have to take that into account when you're looking at the specifications. So let's talk about the specifications of this fan, just recap, because they really haven't changed. I'm going to put the stats for the reverse blade on here, but we really just want to go over the standard blade. So the RPM range has not changed. It's 500 to 2000 RPMs. That'll generate a maximum of 57.11 CFM. Now that's per fan, not all 3 as a total. 2.39 millimeters H2O in the pressure department, so they are suitable to use behind a radiator. 30.6 dBA of noise. They do still have a hydraulic bearing. And the kit still does come with some oil. You can change that out after you've swapped the blades over a number of different times. Now the stat that we really care about today is the rated current of these fans. So the rated current per fan is going to be 0.27 amps on the 12-volt rail. On the 5-volt rail, which is your RGB side, it's going to be 0.72 amps. So you kind of have to multiply that by 3 because you're going to be adding 3 fans to this. So let's talk about the specifications of the Commander Core XT for a second, and really at the same time we'd just be talking about the same specifications on the Commander Core. Now I've been asked a couple times on this channel for the specifications on the Commander Core XT. The documentation from Corsair has no specifications listed for the Core XT. I haven't really looked at the Core, but I don't think they're listed there either. So it's always been kind of a big question mark as to what these are. Now, I reached out to Corsair support to get the specifications for the Commander Core XT some time ago. They referred me to one of their forum pages, which has a post by one of their internal members, it looks like. And the specification that they were showing on the Core XT was just a rated current of 4.5 amps. I've never seen any official documentation that gets into the specifics of that, because if you look at the specifications of the SATA connector, which carries 3.3 volts, 5 volts, and 12 volts, and the specification is it has 4.5 amps of each of those voltages, you would think that it has 4.5 amps available of both 12 volt and 5 volt. Now the 12 volt, of course, is going to be for the PWM connection and the power of the fan itself. The 5 volt rail is going to be for the RGB lighting. But if you really pinned Corsair down as to what the specifications, they'd probably tell you it doesn't matter. The device is designed to work with all of their fans, meaning that you could take any of their fans and plug 6 of them in here, 6 of the PWM connections and 6 of the RGB connections, and it should work with all of them based on how their fans are configured. And fair enough. So kind of what we're asking this to do in this particular instance is not what it was designed to do. But since I'm considering putting 3 fans on an individual port, I have to ask myself, can this controller do it? Now, I did follow up and ask in the forums to one of the members if they could clarify for me that if we get 4.5 amps on the RGB side and another 4.5 amps on the 12 volt side, because that's what makes the most sense to me based on the SATA specification. I did get a response saying, as far as I know, that the 4.5 amps is for the 5 volt rail, which again, it's not very specific. I kind of think they don't know, and I don't think they care that much because it doesn't really matter when you're using their products. But what I really think the specification is 4.5 on both the 5 volt and the 12 volt separately, and 1 amp per port. I've seen that talked about and bounced around. Now on the old Commander Pro, it was 1 amp per port. It just had an RGB channel and it said 4.5 amps total on that. So I don't know if that applies here. Anyways, when I consider putting the fans onto the Commander Core XT, I have to kind of add up the 3 fans and see does it meet the requirements. Now on the PWM power signal on the 12 volt side, it does appear that it would work. You could put this on here and still be under the 1 amp specification. Now on the RGB side, you're gonna probably be over on that because it's 0.74 amps. I did actually hook it up. Now how I did it is I put the PWM in the 12 volt side on the Commander Core XT. I had to adapt the RGB side. Now I had to use the RGB header. Now I do have an adapter cable for one of the 4-pin fan connectors that adapts it to 3-pin ARGB. The problem with using that with all 3 fans is that you can only specify 1 fan there. These fans have 20 LEDs each for a total of 60. Corsair doesn't have a fan that has 60, and you can't specify more than 1 device on the 4-pin ports. So what I had to do is I had to plug them into the 3-pin RGB adapter. I had to take an adapter cable from this 3-pin RGB connector, adapt it to standard 3-pin ARGB, and I was able to then set up the 3-pin lighting in Corsair iCUE, and I was able to select a number of devices, and I was able to get it to work just fine there. Now, I did put the multimeter on it and tested the amp load of that. On the 12 volt side, the maximum amperage draw I saw was 0.63, and the maximum draw I saw on the RGB 5 volt side was 1.32 amps, and that was having to turn everything to full brightness, which we know will draw the most amperage on a device. I never was able to see the maximum rated current draw that the fan is specified for, but still, if we're taking that it's 1 amp per port, we were still over that amount. However, there's a big question mark because on the old Commander Pro, they were just showing 4.5 amps total out this port, in which case we were well within the specification. But because Corsair is not listing that specification at all, I just have a big question mark. Anyways, I put the fans on there, ran them full brightness, full power, 100%, 2000 RPMs, and let them sit there for a couple of hours. I didn't have any problems with it whatsoever. I didn't feel any heat coming through here. I really can't recommend, just based on the information I currently have on the Commander Core XT, that you do this. So if you choose to do it, this really is just your warning at this point. I really can't recommend it. I don't know of any long-term effects. When you get in the forums, you can see that other people are kind of trying to ask the same question, or they have in the past, and there's really not a clear, concise answer. And some of those guys are like, really maybe 2 fans most on the PWM port, certainly don't do 3. And even though I think we're within specifications, I really wouldn't want you to destroy your device. So use a Commander Core XT and a Commander Core at your own risk. But if anybody has some more detailed specifications or some more knowledge and information electrically as far as the Core XT, please share it with us. So a couple of things to consider if you're still looking to do this with Corsair, because you can totally get it done. Now the kit comes with 3 separate cables, meaning you can run the fans individually. You don't have to do all 3 of them at a time. That defeats one of the major functions of this, though, which is getting a big benefit in the cable management. If you're going to just run them separately, then it's really no different than running just a Corsair fan, other than you still do get this fan. It looks great, and you do get the swappable fan blade. So you still do get all those features. You just lose out on some of the cable management advantages. Now, you could consider running 2 fans at a time. So say you're going to do 6 fans total. Instead of doing it in 2 banks of 3, you could do 3 banks of 2. That would reduce the current draw on the controller. I think it would put you under 1 amp. I can't guarantee that. It'd be probably still pretty close depending on the situation. But definitely would reduce the amperage draw on the 12-volt rail. And I only ever saw that full amperage draw when it was white and full bright. Any of the other lighting functions that I did, even within Corsair and solid colors and things like that, were all well under 1 amp. In fact, sometimes just, half an amp. So you could consider breaking up the fans and using them individually. Turning down the brightness and not using white is another way of reducing the amp load of this. Another method you could consider if you still wanted to use the Corsair devices is take the PWM signal and take it off and send it to a powered PWM hub. There should be some hubs out there that have a better PWM power rating, more than 1 amp. In addition to that, you could also take the RGB signal from the 3-pin RGB port and adapt that into 3-pin ARGB and then connect that into a RGB hub. There are a couple of hubs out there, as I just did some quick research, that allow, like, say, 2 amps per port. But basically, you're just using the Corsair controller to send off the RGB signal and the PWM signal into a separate hub that has some better abilities than this, and then you could still use iCUE to control this and in turn control those fans. A couple of hubs that I found after some quick research were going to be the Cooler Master hub and a Silverstone hub. And I'll put links in the description below to those hubs if you want to check those out. But that should give you an idea of a hub that has better per port capabilities than the Core XT. The overall problem with that, of course, is that you're adding additional devices, which are still kind of defeating the purpose of kind of simplifying it with this kit. Now, the intent of this kit, of course, was to connect it to your ARGB header on your motherboard. All the motherboards that I currently have, I've looked at. The power output on the ARGB header is 3 amps, more than enough to power this and probably some more. So you could consider that. Of course, you can take that ARGB header as well and put it to a hub that has the capability of driving this. There are probably some other hubs out there that you could connect this to. I think the takeaway, though, is that it's not as simple as just taking this and plugging it into any old place that you want. You do need to be mindful of the power requirements of this. Take the specification, multiply it by 3, and make sure that whatever controller you're plugging it into has the capability of driving that. Again, the Corsair controller maybe isn't the best suited to be plugging 3 fans into each port, but I'll let you decide all that on your own. I think if I'm going to consider using it, I'm going to split it off and use some external hubs that have a little bit better power requirements, and I'm going to do it that way. Now, a lot of manufacturers are using the modular design, meaning you got 3 or sometimes even 4 fans per cable. So I kind of looked back as to how they were dealing with this situation of the power requirements. If you look at the Lian Li SL120 V2 controller, for example, it has 2 SATA power connectors on it. And Lian Li is calling for, if you use 9 fans or more, or if you use white a lot, or often or all the time, then you need to connect that second SATA power connector. But overall, this is a great fan kit. I think it's cool what Thermaltake is doing to give you the ability to have at least the option of connecting this up to your motherboard and sync it up. You're just going to want to pay special attention to the specifications, the power specifications specifically of the 3 fans combined. Make sure that your controller supports that. So I will link all of these products in the description below. You can check them out. So let me know what your thoughts and experiences are with this fan kit, or what the specifications are of the Core XT, and that will be greatly appreciated. But that is going to do it for today. Thanks for watching.